Hello, everyone. I am Barbara Parmley, a very grateful member of Al-Anon. And they say Maysville, Arkansas. That's our mailing address. But we're really residents of Oklahoma. We live right on we have a farm on the Oklahoma-Arkansas line. And in fact, people always ask me about Maysville. It's a very, very small town. In fact, there was this joke I heard one time about a town that was so small they only had one hooker and she's still a virgin. That's Maysville, population 35. And the state line runs right through it. And then we're about 6 miles from the Missouri line. So we're just right in the corner. And it's going to take me a little bit to kind of get started here this morning. We've just had so many things going on. I've been excited about other things here and trying to think of what my name is and what I'm doing here. And I've heard so many good things. What's left to say? The speakers have all just been wonderful. You gather a little bit of information from each one. And, of course, Carol, I've just, since I've been kind of service-oriented anyway, because I know without service, you wouldn't have an Al-Anon meeting today. Because you know how people are. I'm surprised that AA has lasted as long as it has, with the personalities and all that's them, you know. And because we know the kind of personality we Al-Anons live with, and how did they ever survive this? But I'm always amazed at the wisdom of those two people, those guys that started AA, and those 12 traditions that kept it, and the concepts that kept it what it is. And we talk about change, but we're saying change, not change the program. We have to change, but you can't change. In fact, I just almost get hysterical when they want to change a comma. I think, oh no, and then they'll start on this and this. But I think when Carolyn gave her report, it gives you an idea of what and what we do to keep our program what it is, which is the 12 steps of recovery. And that will never change unless we get the 2/3 of each group. And so I thought that would never be possible because you couldn't get everybody in the group to even agree with anything, much less. So anyway, I always really get a big charge when I hear somebody talking about service, and Carolyn has such a way of putting it across. I'm so glad she was in our district and in our area. Of course, I'm a Missouri Al-Anon today, and because my home group in Arkansas folded, and so I was always going to the Southwest City meeting anyway. It was closer to my home. My husband and I both go there for AA and Al-Anon meetings, so we have 2 meetings a week there in Southwest City. Southwest City is a very small town, about 650. In fact, Southwest City is the town with the closest bank, so we bank in Missouri. And with an Arkansas address and an Oklahoma driver's license. Don't ever get stopped by the highway patrol, because they look at you real suspicious. And then I'm always saying, but please, officer, don't ask me to write a check because it's on the Bank of Missouri. But I am so grateful to be here and see some of my old friends and some people that I've met in the past, and I see them. The names aren't always familiar, but I know the faces. When I hear people talking about their past, I grew up in a home. There was never any drinking around our home. I'm sure my daddy may have had a beer after work or something, but I was never around anybody that did any drinking. And there were 3 girls in our family, and I was the oldest. And I can remember growing up, I just couldn't wait till I could grow up and get away from home and do exactly what I wanted to do. And so I can remember when I was about 13, 14 years old, my daddy took me aside and he started telling me a little bit about the birds and the bees. And he said, now, Barbara, there are certain things that nice girls don't do. And you can't do that till you get married. And you can't get married until you graduate from high school. Because if you do those things, the boys will write your name on the pool hall bathroom door. Now, that was birth control back in the 40s. In fact, when I retired from my job about 7 years ago, I told him, I said, would you go in the men's restroom and write on the inside that Barbara's easy? And put my phone number. But anyway, and then of course I couldn't even date till I was 16, but then we were living in Parsons, Kansas. We moved around every year. My dad's job, we had to keep moving around, mainly in Kansas and Missouri and Texas and Oklahoma. But I'm an Okie. I was born in Ponca City, Oklahoma, and graduated from high school in Bonita, Oklahoma. But anyway, we were always traveling around. But I remember when we were living in Parsons, and I couldn't ride in cars because my daddy said the first time I rode in the car. I ended up I had to get married. That was my mother. So he wouldn't let me ride in cars until I was about 18 probably. But anyway, I couldn't ride in cars, so I could meet the boy at the movie, in front of the movie. My dad would take me and I'd meet him in front of the movie. Well, I didn't get many dates doing that either. But I know I can remember growing up, I always felt like, well, you can see I'm covered with freckles. And I had this bright red hair, and I was real skinny back then. And I always just felt kind of, I don't know, just kind of homely. And cause I remember when people used to come to our house, and my younger sisters, one had big brown eyes, and then I had this little baby sister had these beautiful blue eyes, and they didn't either one have hardly any freckles. I remember people would come to our house, and they'd say, "Oh, isn't that Connie? That's my littlest sister. Isn't she the cutest little thing with those big blue eyes?" And then they'd say to my other sister, talking about her, and say, "Oh, look at Nancy with those big brown eyes. She is so cute and so pretty. And Barbara is so nice." You know, because I knew that to get attention, you're nice. You know, if they had people there that were smoking, I'd carry ashtrays to them, and I'd pick up this and do this, and I always ask them if I could do this so I could get attention. And I got attention by being nice. So anyway, I always wanted to do what my daddy said too, because I wanted my daddy to like me, and of course, I love my father, still do. In fact, I'm sorry I couldn't get to be with him today on Father's Day. He turned 89. He'll be 89 in December, and just as feisty as I am. I think that's part of our genes. But anyway, I couldn't hardly wait to get married. So I could, of course, I had to graduate from high school first. So I graduated from high school in May, and I got married in August, and finally got to do what Daddy said I couldn't do till I got married. And it was a big disappointment. Anticipation is greater than realization. But anyway, so we proceeded to end with this marriage, and after about 2 years, I had a daughter, and then another 2 years, and I kept thinking, I'm going to fix this. You know, this guy he doesn't know how to play house. He was always getting involved in all these other things that had nothing to do with the family. And after 3 children, and he was spending all his time, well, he got into the boating and fishing, and he was gone all the time doing that. And then he got into sports car racing, and our finances were going for that. And just like he never had time to be home with us or do things with the family. So after about 14 years of marriage, I decided if you can't fix it, get rid of it and go find something you can. So I thought, well, this is just not working. So it ought to be better than this. So I told him, I said, I think we need to get a divorce. And, I look back there, I never had a husband beg me to stay married. They just say, well, whatever you think, Barbara. So, but we decided, we would never make it any animosity between us because of the children. So we love our children, but we just didn't like each other. So we got this divorce, and then I'm going to start looking for a perfect husband, a perfect father for my kids that wants to stay home and be with the children, be home with me, make me his hobby. So I started looking. I said and I wanted someone financially secure so that I wouldn't have to work, and I could stay home and play house and take care of these children. And so I said what I was really looking for was a rich sex maniac. At that time, I was working for the state of Oklahoma Vocational Rehabilitation, and we would, I remember writing letters to the Spartan School of Aeronautics regarding clients that would be sending for training, and I would direct these letters to Mr. Charles Parmley, Director of Admissions. So I knew this name, and I'd gone to a rehab conference in Oklahoma City, and Spartan people were there because of doing the training and things for some of our clients. And so he came walking in with, I didn't know who he was, but my boss came walking in, this young man was behind him. And this was about 38 years ago, 39. I had to stop and think how long we've been married, about 39, 40 years ago. And so I said, who's that with my boss? And he said, well, that's Charles Parmley. I thought, he's kind of cute. I know who he is. So anyway, he sat at the same banquet table, and we started visiting. And first question, are you married? No, he'd been married, but he was divorced. Any children? That was another. I was telling somebody earlier, the questions I always went through. I didn't want anybody else's kids. I knew I couldn't raise any more. I got 3. That's enough. And so, he'd been married, but he was divorced. And did you have any children? No, I don't have any children, but I sure would love to have some. And so anyway, we visited at that conference, and he said, if you're ever in Tulsa, that's where he was living, he said, give me a call. Well, the next weekend I was in Tulsa. I had a sister who lived there, so I thought, well, I'll go visit my sister. And so I called him, and we went out to dinner, and so we started dating. And I noticed that, in fact, coming home from that conference, that very first conference, I said something about Charles Palmer. I was kind of asking my boss about him because they fish together some over around the lake. And he said, well, that Charles Party, I said, we don't know, he may have a drinking problem. Well, he didn't drink any more than any of the rest of them did. Now, I didn't know a whole lot about drinking. I know that I couldn't wait till I got old enough where I could go out and drink, and I would order a shrimp cocktail. Cocktails, aren't that something you drink? I didn't know it was something that you ate. We didn't have shrimp cocktails in our home, or even any kind of cocktails or anything like that. I couldn't believe it when I finally realized what a shrimp cocktail was. Like I say, I was fairly naive. So anyway, didn't know much about sex or drinking either. So I know when he said that about the drink, I thought, well, I never did see him. He didn't drink any more than the rest of these guys, and all I would order was maybe one drink. And I like that little cherry in the bottom. Is that a Tom Collins, I think? Anyway, I like the cherry in there, but I'd get that one drink and kind of sip on it all evening because a few times if I drank more than one, I would get my nips would get lump. And I loved to dance. Well, you can't dance if you're getting too much drinking. And I didn't like the guys that drank too much because then they couldn't dance. They'd either fall on the floor, they wouldn't, So I didn't like being around drunks. I just liked to be where they drank because you're having fun and I loved to dance. But anyway, so he said, well, I think that Charlie I think he has a drinking problem. Of course, back then in Oklahoma, you had to carry your bottle in wherever you went, and you just checked it in at the bars, and they would serve your drinks out of it, something similar. I think something like that. But anyway, we started dating, and but I noticed that every once in a while he'd have me get this bottle out of his glove box in his car. He said, would you hand me that peppermint schnapps? And I said, what is that? And he said, that's mouth freshener. I never heard of peppermint schnapps. So I know his breath always smelled good. So we continued to see each other off and on, and finally, after about, it seemed like it was almost a year, maybe not quite that long, he said, and I noticed I noticed it started to know some drinking, but he was never out of control. When I look back, I just didn't know what he's like sober. But he had this good job. You couldn't be a drunk and have this good job. So anyway, he said, I've got this farm over on the Arkansas-Oklahoma line where my grandparents lived and my parents lived, and I've always wanted to retire back there, and I bought some land. In fact, he had cattle over there that he'd already had land leased and had these cattle. And he said, I'd like to build a home over there, and we could get married, and that'd be a good place to raise these children, and I'd like to have some children of my own. And I thought, this would be wonderful. In fact, after we finally got engaged, and so I quit my job in Bonita and moved to Tulsa. He got me a duplex there, and the children and I moved to Tulsa. And so then after we got married, we commuted from Tulsa to Maysville every weekend, building this house on this 40 acres he had over there so that we could live happily ever after. He had a friend that had a lumber yard in Arkansas there in a town called Gravett. And he said, I'm going to work there, and that'll make a living for these children, and everything will be fine. Well, I know going back and forth between Tulsa and Maysville, it takes about 2 hours, and he was drinking all the way, It beer. I said, I thought you weren't supposed to drink and drive. Well, it's okay to drink beer. You're just not supposed to drink the hard. I thought, okay. And, I never questioned him. Anybody that smart, you wouldn't ever question him, I was very gullible. So anyway, in fact, he just had something I wanted, and I was willing to go to any lengths to get it. So anyway, we finally got this home finished, and in fact, we got married in December, and our baby was born in October. So you can see, that's the first time I ever tried to have a baby. He wanted a child of his own, and I've always tried not to, and had 3. So it's kind of fun to try to have one. And so anyway, I got pregnant, and he was just so excited, and I was too. So we finally got to have this baby. Well, I began to notice his drinking. In fact, I remember one time we were still living in Tulsa, and he was taking some people from Iceland out for dinner. They'd come up there regarding some students they were going to enroll in Spartans, and we'd go out to eat this dinner, and every time you'd pick up your glass, they'd say, "Skål," and bang the glass at each other's glass. If you pick your glass, I quit picking my glass up because it jarred my hand. And so they scolded Charlie right under the table. And so when we were through eating, I was going to have to these guys were staying in a motel out by the airport, and I was going to have to drive through Tulsa, and I wasn't used to driving much around Tulsa. And I was going to have to drive him because Charlie's almost passed out, and he had to sit in the back seat. So I'd drive these guys home, and I'm thinking, Iceland, is that like Eskimos, where they always shared their wives back in those? I remember seeing a movie about where they shared their wives. What do they think they're supposed to share their wives, and all this crazy stuff running through my head. But anyway, I did get them home, but I was really upset about that. I thought, what am I getting myself into, this man drinking like that? But it'll be better when we get to the farm and we have this baby and everything's going to be fine. So we finally got, we finally got the home built and moved to Maysville. Got moved in our house, and I had this baby named Charlotte. And now I've got these 3 of mine, which they go to their own father every other weekend, but we had Charlotte. And Charlie just kept drinking more. Now, by this time, I wasn't working anymore, and we're on this farm, and we're raising, Charlie's a workaholic. And so when we moved down there, he decided, we're poultry country out in there, so he decided he'd raise some chickens. He already had cattle. In fact, one time I asked him, I said, how many cows do you have? Well, I don't know how many cattlemen there are here, but you don't ask a cattleman how many cows he has, because it starts, well, I've got 75 cows and 45 heifers and 16. I said, Charlie, just how many of those things go moo? You know? And so anyway, we built these broiler houses. We had 45,000 broilers. Never did count the cows, all of them. And then he started raising hogs, because if you could raise pigs, you could sell those faster, because with chickens it took 12 weeks. Then now it just takes about 8 weeks to raise them, but 12 weeks to raise your chickens before you get a batch. And then, and the cattle, it takes quite a while to get your calves big. So to keep the money going like it should, you had to have 3 or 4 things going. And so here we got the cows and the chickens and the hogs and the drunk. And 4 kids. So I can remember, he started disappearing on me. He would go to the Missouri line to get his booze. Well, I was always watching, because he had it hid all over the place, because I guess it's, you always want to have, they wanted to have it handy. But anyway, I'd take my binoculars, and everybody still, in fact, every once I still get my binoculars out and watch for him. But anyway, I was looking, I could see him going down across the creek where the hogs were, and I could see where he put that bottle in that tree trunk. And as soon as kids got home from school, I said, go down that tree trunk on the next to the fence, there's some bottles. And the kids were so excited. They loved hunting bottles. Most kids hunt Easter eggs, ours hunted bottles. They'd come in, Mother, we found one under a rock out by the chicken house, And so, anyway, and then he'd go off to go get cigarettes, and he wouldn't come back till the next day. Well, when you're married to a sex maniac, you know what he's doing. So then you got to keep track of his mileage, because I want to know who she is. Well, I didn't know very many people in the country there. We'd met a few couples when we first moved down there. Charlie introduced me to some of his friends that he knew around there. So it had to be 1 or 2 of these. There's just about 3 or 4 ladies I knew. It had to be one of them. So I thought, I wonder which one it is. So I would call them. About 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, you call them. And then when I heard the speaker last night, I thought, how crazy, this insanity. When she answers, well, I know it's not her. So then what do you say? Mary Jane, what, that recipe for that chocolate pie, do you have that handy? Or you just have to make up something really weird to justify your phone call. And the one that didn't answer, that's the one. But, of course, it never was. And I don't know, he never would tell me. In fact, I told him about 4 or 5 years ago, I said, now he's been sober 34 years now. I've been an Al-Anon 35. I said, Charlie, where were you those times? He said, and who are you with? He said, you mean you're still thinking about that? And I said, it wouldn't hurt to know, but he probably doesn't remember anyway. But from what I've heard alcoholics say, I hope he doesn't. But anyway, things were just getting crazier and crazier. And this was we got married in 65, and I started Al-Anon in 1968. So I kept doing all these crazy things, trying to keep track of where he was and how many miles he'd gone, and he'd take off, and I'd take off behind him trying to catch him. And I remember one time I was going to catch him, and I took off behind him, and we was going up and down these roads, and the dust is blowing, and people standing out in the yard going, what's going on here, And so finally I thought, well, I better get home. I've got these babies at home, and of course I had 2 teenage daughters that were old enough to kind of help take care of them, but still yet, I needed to get home. It was getting close to midnight, and I started home, ran out of gas. About a mile from Maysville. And I'm thinking, what if somebody stops to help me? What's my excuse for being out like this? And then I'm thinking, I've got to have help. So pretty soon here comes this car, and it's Charlie. What the hell are you doing? I told him what happened, so he siphoned out just enough gas to get me home. He said, now you get your rear home. And another time I was chasing him up and down the roads the day before Christmas, when everybody else is off wrapping their Christmas presents or getting ready for Christmas. I'm out trying to find the drunk. Couldn't find him. He disappeared on me again. And the children were at their father's in Bonita. So I just had the baby. And so we go up and down the roads, and there's a road right there by our place. When the water's not too high, you can just drive through it. Otherwise, you don't drive through that road, because the creek's too high. But anyway, I thought I could make it, and I started through it and got stuck and couldn't make it. And so I thought, well, I think I remember when my first husband, when something about spark plugs wet, you dry them off, and all this stuff coming through my mind. And so I'm thinking, well, I'll get one of these diapers. That's back when you had cloth diapers. So I got out and I opened up the hood and I jerked these things off those plugs. And I think those are supposed to go back on the same ones you take them off of. So I'm trying to figure out that part. But I did dry them and finally got it put back. But all the time I'm doing the little baby, she threw a bottle out the window and it's going down the creek and she's crying, honking the horn, and I'm thinking, oh my God. Well, and then you think, well, I wish somebody'd come along and help me. No, what am I going to say? What am I doing out here on this December in this creek on the day before Christmas? And I'm saying, God, if you just get me out of this, I'll never chase that guy again. But I finally got it to where I could jerk it up out of the water, and it finally dried off enough to get home, and I vowed I would never, ever chase him again. And that lasted a while. So anyway, that was part of my insanity. And so my sister from Tulsa would come to visit us, and she knew that there was how crazy I was acting, and things were going kind of weird. I always look back at our behavior. I thought one time, I'm going to leave before he does and make him wonder where I am. So I get in the car and I go about a mile from the house and back up in the road and I park. And I'll just make him wonder. Of course, now I look back, he probably had a nice, quiet evening of drinking and nobody bothering him. And here's the coon hunters going up and down the road. Every once in a while I'd see one of them go by and and I just hear those coon hunters saying, who's that over there? Well, isn't that Charlie Parmley's wife? Well, no wonder he drinks. But see, you can always tell there's a problem of drinking in the family by the non-drinker's behavior more than you. And I remember him telling me that when I first got in there. I'm like, yep, that's right. Because everybody thought Charlie's a good old guy. He just drank a little too much. Even my folks thought he was a pretty good. Well, I think they're probably afraid I'd come home with 4 kids. But they said, well, Charlie's not that bad a guy, But anyway, so my sister brought me this literature, and I read it, and it said something. It told me about Al-Anon and about alcoholism and what could be, that they can't help it and so forth. And gave me an address and phone number of a contact of a lady in Silent Springs, Arkansas. And we're about 35. Well, you go by time. It takes you about 35 minutes to get there from Maysville. It's about 25 miles. But anyway, so I thought, well, I don't need that. I've had it. I'm going to file for divorce. And so of course, when you got 4 kids, I couldn't find, there wasn't any job around. I didn't know anybody around to find a job. So I thought, I'm just going to file for divorce if I have to go on welfare. So I go to Jay, and I go to this attorney, and I tell him that I'm married to this horrible alcoholic, and all these problems and all these things. And I come home and I tell Charlie. And then I went to the bank, got all the money out and put it in my name. And then went home and told him I'd file for this divorce. And he said, now, Barbara, I'll quit drinking if you just drop that divorce and put the money back in the bank. So that's all I wanted to hear, that he's going to quit drinking. And he'd stay sober 3 or 4 months. And so he started drinking again. Well, what works. So I just go to another lawyer. Too embarrassed to go back. Well, in fact, I was too embarrassed to go back to that same lawyer and tell him to drop it. Because after all, what kind of woman would they think I was going back to somebody that bad? But I described it. So I went to a different lawyer. And I was spending more on lawyers than Charlie was on booze. So I go to this another lawyer and go through this same ritual, go home, tell Charlie the same thing. He quits drinking and things are fine, and he starts again. And so I thought, well, of course he thought of murder a few times. I thought I could kill him as a burglar. In fact, I loaded the gun one night, and this big rifle thing. I know how to do BB guns and 22s are my thing, and I don't know anything about all these others, but there was this one big thing there. And so I put this bullet in, one of those big round kind of looking things. Anyway, I put the bullet in there, and I'm thinking when he comes, I'm going to tell him I thought it was a burglar. I've had it. Why get a divorce and split everything when I'm going to kill him and get it all? Before he drinks it up. You agree. So, anyway, I get to thinking, well, what if you go to prison? And what this? And then all what ifs. So, oh gosh. Well, I didn't know how to get the bullet back out again. So I'm thinking, how am I going to get it? What if I blow up something? So anyway, I just go out and I shoot it off in the air and almost hit the electric transformer. I have to look out. My God, Barbara, you better not touch a gun again. So that didn't work. Then there came a time when I thought about when he comes in passed out in that pickup, and I can just asphyxiate him. I've heard of people committing suicide that way. I could do that. And that seems simple. So I thought of, next time he comes in, and then I'm thinking, you're getting crazy again, Barbara. Now, back when I first got out of high school, I remember I went to work for the director of nursing at the Eastern State Hospital, which is an insane asylum in Veneta. And in fact, that's where I first saw the word alcoholics. alcoholics were admitted at Eastern State Hospital. That's because I know, and somebody'd say something about an alcoholic. Well, Charlie wasn't crazy. He would just drink too much. But I can remember that people sometimes cross this line, and then they would really do something crazy. And I thought, Barbara, you're getting pretty close to that line when you're thinking things like this. You better get some help. So I got that pamphlet back out that my sister had brought me in, and thought, I'll contact this lady. So I had the neighbor lady drive me to Siloam to find this woman, and her name's Donna L. And I don't know if any of you know Donna or have ever had the privilege of knowing Donna L. from Siloam Springs and stuff, and Neil. And she come out and was smiling, and she said, I understand how you feel. Nobody ever said that. Nobody understood how I felt. And so she proceeded to tell me about a meeting on Friday night and at Siloam Springs, and if I would meet another lady that lived in a town between my home and her home in Siloam and Maysville, she could bring me to my meeting because she was going to be out of town. Well, at that time, she was the delegate for Arkansas, so they had some function that weekend. But anyway, so I go back to this other, where this lady worked with a poultry company there in Decatur, Arkansas, and her name was Wanda. She's my sponsor today. But anyway, I go in there and I tell this lady that I'm about seeing Donna and about a meeting, and she says, oh yes, she said, no, she was just smiling and all this. I go, well, she couldn't be married to a drunk like mine, or she wouldn't be this happy. And she said, well, we'll just meet here in Decatur on Friday evening, and then you can ride with us the rest of the way to Siloam. We'll show you where the meeting is. So I go home, and Charlie just started drinking again, and things were getting crazy, and I'm thinking, okay, I've had it. And I remember something in that pamphlet about when you make a decision, stick to it. This time I'm filing for a divorce, and I'm sticking to it. So I go to the third lawyer, which was a good thing because there was only 3 in J anyway. So I go up to this lawyer, file for this divorce, and I come home and tell Charlie. And he would, when he promised he'd quit, I thought, no, it's not working. So he had to move out. Well, his mother lived not too far, so he just went up there to stay for during this time. And so comes Friday, and Wanda calls me to go to that meeting. Am I still going to meet her? I said, I don't need to go. I've taken care of the problem. And she just kept on about it. She said, well, you still carry the disease, the illness of living with an alcoholic. You really need to be going to meetings and all that. And she said, why don't you just try one? And she just kept on. She was so adamant about getting me to that meeting. I thought, well, maybe it's a membership drive. Don't you remember when you get so many people come to a Tupperware party or Sunday school, when you get so many bring it to Sunday school, you got a little star by your name. So I thought, well, okay. I didn't want to disappoint her, so I said, okay. So I did meet her, and I sat in the back seat, and I was asking her husband all these things. I said, I couldn't figure out why when Charlie goes off to get cigarettes, he doesn't come home till the next day. That's what makes me so angry. And so he said, Barbara, a lot of times I'd get my bottle, I'd go out on the road, and I'd start drinking. I just wanted to drink. And I'd pass out. And when I wake up, I didn't even know where I was. I'd have to wait till daylight to find my way home. Oh, that sounds reasonable. I could understand that, that could be what's wrong with Charlie. So I went to that first meeting. I didn't have a clue what to expect. I was so embarrassed. I hope nobody thought I was an alcoholic. It was in the same building. I thought they think I'm an alcoholic walking into this AA building. But I got in there, and at the time there weren't any men, there were just these ladies sitting around the table. And they were all smiling and laughing like most of us do. And I think, man, they couldn't be living at the problem I'm living with, or they wouldn't be smiling and laughing. And so in our area, what we do when a newcomer comes in, each one tells a little bit about why they're there and what Al-Anon means to them, so that you can maybe find that one person in there you can identify with. And so each one of them would go around and tell a little bit, and most of them all had their husbands in the other room at the AA meeting. I thought, yeah, no wonder you can say that. Your husband's in there sober. And so I remember Donna, which was we call her the old-timer then. Of course, she hadn't been in all that many years. But, they described to me the illness of alcoholism. How that when he took that first drink, he was physically addicted, and it did something for him that made him mentally addicted, and only a higher power could get him to stop. And I thought, maybe that's what the problem is. So maybe I ought to give him another chance. If it really is an illness like something else, they said, Barbara, what you need to do is at least give it a chance, because if you don't get yourself straightened out, you're going to end up just getting another one. Of course, my first husband didn't drink. We'd go to a party, like you say, once in a while. If we'd have enough money, we might go out and party on a Saturday night. But, so I thought, well, maybe if that's what it is, and I look back, of course, Charlie was always a wonderful dad. Even drunk, he was a wonderful father. because I'm the one that's doing, as you heard last night, I'm the one doing the yelling and the screaming at the kids. Now, I might be in there cooking dinner, humming and singing and carrying on, and Charlie comes in drunk, hi, and then passes out on the couch. They all look at Dad, he's drunk. All of a sudden, Mama starts cussing at the kids and slamming the cabinet doors, and they look, all right. And I understand when Alateens say that they're more affected by the non-drinker than the drinker. So anyway, I go home and I called Charlie. In fact, I told the kids first. I said, I think I know what's wrong with Dad. And even the stepchildren, they called him Dad. It's just easier to call them all Dad. It's really confusing because if their real father brought him home and they'd yell Dad, Charlie said, huh? And so did their dad say, huh? But anyway, so I called him. I said, I told the kids, I said, I think I know what's wrong with your dad. If he's an alcoholic. And if I start going to these meetings, it might help us. And it might help him. And they said, Mother, just do whatever you have to do to help Dad. So I called him and told him what I thought the problem was if he wanted to come home. So he came home. And I started going to my meetings. And I quit arguing. You know how they like to, in fact, Charlie even told you, he used to love to go around trying to pick a fight, and you just have to learn, you may be right, and then go in the bathroom and call him all kinds of names. But, I wouldn't argue anymore. I just let him do what he had to do. And so finally, after I've been going for about 6 or 8 months, and trying to work the steps and do exactly, I've left him alone. And he got worse. I had already moved him out on a cot in the utility room so he wouldn't have to come in the bedroom and stink so bad. And it was closer to his pickup. He just kept his bottles in his pickup where he under his seat, and he could go out the back door and get to his bottle. So I just moved him out there, and he was just finally just drinking around the clock. And I told him, I went to Alan, I said, this thing is not working. I've been working these steps, trying to do what you told me to do, and he's getting worse. He's dying. And they said, well, Barbara, he has the right to die. Well, that's kind of selfish sounding. I said, you don't have any power over Charlie. Admit your life. Well, in fact, when I walked in, they had those steps on the wall. Powerless over alcohol. Well, I don't even drink. Why should I worry about taking step 1? Now, my life might be a little unmanageable, but only because I can't get everybody straightened down. Then it would be manageable. And they said, well, you're powerless over what alcohol does to anyone else's life. Of course, today I know I'm just powerless over anyone's life. So anyway, I had been working those steps, and I thought, I have to turn him loose, and I thought, I'd look at those steps, I'd turn my life and go over to the care of God as I understand. But what is God's will for me? And this one lady said, well, Barbara, for you, you may not know what His will is for you, but I'll bet you know what it isn't. I just suggest you start doing the opposite of what you've always been doing. Well, you know what it says, if you keep on doing what you've always been doing, you keep on getting what you've always been getting. So I've had to start doing the opposite. And you have to stop and think. And I don't ever think. I just, my mouth's going before my brain even says what needs to come out the other end. But I thought, oh my goodness, so I had to start stopping and thinking, and if I was going to react to this, don't react. If I've never reacted to that, then you might better say something. So I was learning how to change. And finally, when they come home I finally got a job. Finally, Charlie decided I could go to work. He always, what few times I would mention, no, you need to stay home to take care of this family, and blah, blah, blah. And so finally, he said I could go to work. And I thought if I could just get a job, then I could leave him, because I could support the children and I. And so finally, he consented to letting me go to work, as long as I made the home first. That's our first priority. So I got this job in a poultry plant there, not too far from us, doing payroll. And so I had this job now, and I could leave any time I wanted to. And I think, well, I'll wait a little bit longer. And pretty soon, finally, Charlie did get sober, and I had the job, and things were going pretty good. He was going to meetings, and he had a few slips, but he finally, like I said, his birth date is October 1969, and mine's May of 1968. I'm so glad I got a year. That's the only thing I got ahead of him on. I don't let him forget it either. But thank God I had a year ahead, because he couldn't have lived with me sober. I couldn't stand him drunk, and he couldn't stand me sober. So we just, we were always back and forth. So I remember one time, he'd been sober quite a while by then, maybe a year, and our marriage was awful in sobriety. I didn't know him sober. He didn't know me sober either. And so it was kind of hard to get adjusted, because we're both trying to change. And when they were telling me how hard it was, I knew how hard it was for me to change, and I don't have a physical allergy. And I'd go to meetings and I'd be whining, well, I always have to give in, and he gets his way all the time, blah, blah, blah. I said, Barbara, now, Charlie has a bad day. He could take a drink. If he takes a drink, he'll die. If you have a bad day, you just have a bad day. sometimes I wish I were an alcoholic. In fact, I'm always teasing it's cheaper to be an alcoholic, too. You only have to buy one book. Al-Anon's, we've got this big, I've got to have to get me a case with wheels on to carry all these books. In fact, an AA member one time said some smart remark to me as I was walking in. I had all these books in my bag, and they were saying, boy, you Al-Anon sure have a lot of books. I said, hey, it takes a lot of books to live with an alcoholic. We were coming home from one of our meetings. In fact, we really, it was pretty quiet and wasn't all that great around there in sobriety. And so finally one time I thought, well, maybe if I made some amends. We were coming back from our meeting at Siloam. It took 30 minutes to get there and 30 minutes back. And so that gives you time to kind of have some quiet time to think away from the kids. So I thought, I'll make some amends. And then he can make his amends to me, and then we can kiss and make up. And things might get a little better in that area. So we were coming home, and I'm thinking, I'm going to say this, and he's going to say that. And you know how we do, we play it in our mind. And so I said, Charlie, you know, I really need to apologize for the way I acted when you were drinking. And I know I said and did some stupid things, and I'm really sorry. And so it's real quiet, and I'm waiting. And he turned and looked at me and says, you damn well should be. Some of you here may know Charlie. But anyway, that's his personality. But anyway, I was really angry when I got home. I called my sponsor and told her that didn't work. It was amends. She said, Barbara, you did your part. You never, you can't be responsible for what the other party does. So everything starts going along pretty good. In fact, when we started meetings everywhere. In that area, Siloam was the only place that anybody could go to meetings. Grove, Oklahoma is about 45 miles from Siloam. People who moved in the Grove area was wanting meetings, so they would go, and people from Noel, Missouri, and Southwest City, Missouri, and Jay, all of them, we were wanting meetings, and so we'd have to drive to Siloam. So finally we decided, well, let's start a meeting on Monday night over in Grove, or Tuesday night in Noel, and so there were meetings every night somewhere that some of the people, old timers, we've been in a couple of years, and so we were going to meetings every night in all these little towns, and they always had to leave the children too. His mother lived there, and she babysitted until we got the girls got old enough to babysit some of them. But Charlie was always a fanatic parent. He never wanted to leave them home, even when they were teenagers. He just didn't think you ought to leave children alone. But anyway, so here we're going to these meetings every night. Our life was just totally consumed with AA and Al-Anon, and kids were growing up, and I got active in service, and after about 10 years, in fact, the younger daughter, Charlie and I's daughter. The older girls went off to college, and then son, he decided when he was 15 he wanted to go live with his natural father because he promised him a motorcycle, and they lived in the city and they wasn't living on a farm. And Charlie always said, you can't have a motorcycle or long hair. So he went to live with his dad. But anyway, so we had just a daughter at home, Charlotte, our prodigal daughter. And so when she was about 13 or 14, I went in and was talking to her one time, and I said, now, Charlotte, honey, this alcoholism can be hereditary. It is hereditary, and there could be the possibility that you've inherited the physical allergy to alcohol, so don't ever touch it. Because if you did and you had a physical allergy, you could become an alcoholic. And I don't think I could watch another person dying from alcoholism in our family. So she's an old mother. If I ever drank like Dad, I'd quit. Well, she was only about 2 or 3 when he quit drinking, so she doesn't remember his drinking. She just remembers all the AA. In fact, our son, I remember when Charlie finally, he was old enough to learn how to drive the tractor, and he'd been doing some other things on the farm that he was letting him do, and we were taking him up to his mom's to babysit for us on our way to the meeting, and Kurt leans, that's my son's name, Kurt, he leans back there in that seat, and he says, now, Dad, when do I get to start going to AA meetings? There for a while, when he got to be older, I was wondering if he may not end up, but anyway, that was just, AA was a part of our life. We had meetings in our home. In fact, Charlie got so busy in service, he said, we've got to sell this farm with all the chickens and hogs and the cows, and I'll build us another home, buy us another place over here, and I'll just have cattle, and that way it'll be easier for me to leave, because he used to go off to his service meetings, the area assemblies and things, and I'd have to go out and check the cows. And so he had them scattered in land he had leased in different places, and had these old pickups that were really hard to shift, and some of you probably know some of those. It's 4 or 5 gears and clutches and things. And anyway, so I don't like to do all this gear shifting, so I just go slow and let the kids jump out. The kids sit on the tail, and so when I slow down, you're supposed to jump out and go check that hot wire. We had hot wires along a lot of places. So I just go slow, and they could jump out and back on. I wouldn't have to keep going all the way all through all those gears. So anyway, one time he came back from one of these area assemblies, and he said, did you check the cows over in the so-and-so field? Yes, I sure did. You did? I said, yes. He said, how come you didn't see that dead cow? I said, what dead cow? I said, was it in the woods? No, Barbara's laying out in the field with his feet in the air. Another time he'd gone off and he came back and he said, did you check the well, now, when the baby was little, I didn't like to go out in the chicken houses and then come back in with that chicken dust, so I had to keep taking a shower every time I'd go in and out to check the chickens. So I would just peek through the curtains. We had these wires, if you've ever seen them, they got these wires. So I just peek through the curtains. Yeah, they're all in there. You know, the fans are running. It looks like the feeder's running. It looks okay. So one time he came home and he said, you checked the chickens? I sure did. All three houses? All three houses. How come you didn't see that one end that was flooded down to the other? Uh-oh, got in trouble again. So he finally had to hire a neighbor to take care of things while he was gone. But then he said, I think I better just get rid of this and we'll get this other farm and I'll just have cattle. So we, because of our activities in AA and Al-Anon, we moved at this other farm and just had cattle. And we hadn't been over there 2 years, and Charlie had a heart attack. And the doctor said, you can't take care of these cattle anymore because you're getting out in that cold air really would upset Charlie. In fact, he didn't have to have surgery. There's the proper medication and all this that you'll be able to take care of it, probably. I suggest you quit smoking, Charlie, but you'll have to do that like you do with your drinking. And I remember the smoking. I never smoked. I tried to smoke. I tried to drink. I tried to do everything. I still cuss some. But, I never did have much success at smoking either. But anyway, so I used to think, oh, I wish he didn't smoke. You'd pick up the town that smelled like tobacco. And finally, I remember now on telling me, wasn't he doing that when you married him? Yeah, okay, and forget it. So that's just part of Charlie. I love him. Don't look at the things that's wrong. Look at the things you like. So I remember one time we'd been up St. Louis at an AA function, coming home, and we'd almost home. And I said, Charlie, you haven't smoked a cigarette since we left St. Louis. And he said, Barbara, I haven't smoked a cigarette for 2 weeks, and I think you're carrying that detachment a little too far. Ooh, what do you say? Well, honey, they told me in Al-Anon, if you did anything that offended me or that I didn't like, I just had to tune it out. And I just tuned it out whether you smoked or not, so I just didn't pay any attention. It sounds good, right? And so anyway, but he did quit his smoking. But when he had that heart attack, which we thought was a terrible thing, it gave him more time to be involved in AA. But here's our little prodigal daughter growing up in this fellowship, meetings in our home all the time, just always surrounded, taking her to open meetings. Wonder she didn't have lung problems. Back then, all the meetings were smoking meetings. And finally, when she was about 14, 15, I'd been in Al-Anon about 10 years. Carol Burnett came out with something. Do you know what your children are doing? So, have you looked in her room? So, I just go in her bedroom and I start looking. I found some little funny-looking little pipes. I could say, there could be marijuana growing in my flower bed, and I wouldn't even know that either. But anyway, I didn't know what those were. I thought, she shouldn't be having those. And I found all kinds of little strange things. So I thought, So I thought, I'm going to quit my job so I can stay home and watch this kid. I'll substitute at school so I can be up there when they're doing school and see what's going on up there. So I started, watching her like a hawk. And her coming and going. In fact, one time the neighbors called us and said, did you know that your daughter's been slipping out at night? And you can't even see her. We live quite a ways, but he said he could see where this car come down our lane. And he said, the only reason I'm calling is because I have a daughter myself. Well, we go and look in her bedroom, and she's gone. So we get in the car. Charlie gets his baseball bat. We get in the car, and we're going to go find that daughter. And we're running up and down the same roads and going down the same creeks and that I used to go to look for him. We never did find her. So she finally comes home, and Charlie he says, you going to go in there and talk to her? I said, no, not tonight. We'll wait till tomorrow. But anyway, so of course we talked to her some. And a few times, I remember one time she'd gone to spend the night with somebody, and we heard some pecking on her bedroom window. And so I go in there, and boy, Charlie goes in there, and he sees this kid, and he raises that window, and that boy takes off running down through the field out to the road to his car. That boy's in AA now in our Southwest City meeting. In fact, we do a lot of joking about that. But anyway, so I'm beginning to get obsessed with this daughter. And then one morning, like I said, I wasn't working anymore. I was staying home, and I go in to get her, and her room's cleaned up. Right there's a sign, something's wrong. And she wasn't there. So I called her friends. Did they know where she was? No, they didn't have a clue. And she'd run away. And we didn't know, we went to the proper authorities so that we could find her. And she had to become a ward of the court in order for them to do that. And I can remember laying there in my bedroom crying, thinking, is this my reward? You know, God, I've turned my life well over to care of you. My life is supposed to be different today, and look what's happening. Just, why am I being punished? And it's like this voice is saying, Barbara, this didn't happen to you. You know, what makes you, this happens to lots of parents. What makes you think you're different? Your life is fine. You go on about your business. I'll take care of that child. That's my child. And I love her more than you. And so I'm trying to tell her myself these things, you know, and that I know, but yet that pain of a mother, you know, it's not natural to detach from a child that came out of your womb. Cows don't detach from their calves. That's what I used to tell my husband when my first kid left, and I started bawling. He said, Barbara, leave home, blah, blah, blah. I said, yeah, but and I know why those cows cry and moo when you sell their calves. And they said, Barbara, they moo because their bags hurt. Well, my heart hurts, you know. I'm in pain. But anyway, so, you know, in Al-Anon, you know, you have to detach and let God take care of that child. And yet society says you're responsible for that child. They're starting to investigate us. I heard your husband's in AA. He's an alcoholic. And blah, blah, blah. Yes, and of course, it's a small community. Everybody knows everybody. In fact, her parole officer deal was the same lady that was a good friend of mine that took me to my first Al-Anon contact in Siloam. But anyway, we finally found her about 3 or 4 days later. But all this time, when I've had all this fear, I think that's when I hit my real bottom, when I knew there's no way I'm going to ever be able to control those people I love. And I had to know that if she lives okay and if she doesn't okay. And I'm one of the fortunate ones that she did live, because my sponsor lost 2 sons within 6 months of each other from suicide, from drugs. So, you know, I'm just one of the lucky ones. But anyway, at that time, it was the fear and the anger. You know, is this my reward for being so good? And I remember trying to say, Barbara, God does not reward, nor does he punish. You do good, you feel good. You do bad, you feel bad. You know, God is. And I knew that, you know, but yet, you know, I thought, like, I just knew that things ought to be okay out here. In fact, I can remember after I had cataract surgery, the first eye, and there's probably a lot of you had cataract surgery, the first eye that I had done, I'd look through it, and those plants hanging on my planters were this most brilliant red, and I'd look through the old eye, and there was that pale-looking color. That's like a spiritual awakening. It's like God didn't change anything out here. He just changes Barbara, so that I can look at things different out here. And so that's what, you know, gradually, the longer you stay in, the more you change. I read something was on a little sign the other day. It says, is God your steering wheel or your spare tire? And I thought about that coming up here all the way, because I'd just seen that the day before I came up here, because I got lost a couple times. And I'm thinking, well, I didn't care. You know, I got to see some things that I had places and all. It didn't make that big. I allowed myself plenty of time. But, you know, if God's my steering wheel, I'm going to usually get in the right place. I may get lost a few times, but God's going to steer me there. In fact, that was something when I first started out on. There wasn't all that much literature, which Mary Beth and I both know that, don't we, Mary Beth? And I remember there was a God's law of adjustment. You pray for God's guidance, and then you go ahead and take some action. And if it's not the right thing, He'll get you on the right track. There'll be obstacles in your way. That's when the fear of flying. I remember when I thought, well, it's a pilot's time to go and not mine. And this lady said, Barbara, you won't be on that plane. So when I'd go to my first flight, I went through St. Louis because I was going to meet Loretta Ross from Missouri. She and I were going to be delegates the same year, so we were going to fly together. And first thing you see is the seat cushion could be used for flotation. But I'm going to be way up there. Why would I need something to float? Yeah. But you know, I had to just know that wherever I am at this very moment is where God intends for me to be. If I'm not supposed to be there, I won't. So all the way to the airport, I had to drive about this 100 miles and to get to Tulsa at that time. And I'm thinking, if there's a car wreck in front and I don't make it, that means I'm not supposed to be on that plane. In fact, today I don't push anything. I've learned more patience standing in line and doing it, because that's right where I need to be. And I always have to remember that one thing my sponsor today, Wanda, always said, God does not do nor allow to be done what you wouldn't do yourself if you knew the end results. Today, that daughter, of course, she ended up in Raider Center, which is like a reform school, and for a while. And in fact, I told her, I said, how do you stand it in here, Charlotte? She said, oh, it's okay, Mom. I'm tutoring other students. She was always an exceptional student. When I was substituting at school, the teachers would mark her there when she was really gone. Because I knew, because we'd taken her to a conference, and they marked her there. because evidently she had her lessons or something. But that kid, she finally, after we found her, and she didn't want to come home. She became a ward of the court, so she would stay in foster homes. She was in the Baptist Children's Home in Olathe. And in fact, my granddaughter, her daughter, who's 13 now, she goes through the high school at Jay, and she sees her aunts and uncles, or aunts' pictures hanging on there. Well, where's Mom's? I said, well, you better talk to your mom about that. But that child, and she went out to Las Vegas to live with some fellow when she was about 17, and in fact, the courts gave us custody finally, and back. She said, yeah, she decided to do what we said to do. She wasn't going to do what we said to do. When one of the speakers today said, when you tell them, these are the rules. Charlie always had rules. Even though he loved these children, there were rules. And if you can't obey the rules, then you can't stay here. Well, she didn't want to obey our rules, so she would live other places. So finally, she did decide that she would do what we were going to get custody back. And Charlie said, well, I'll tell you what, Charlotte, what do you want to do? She said, I just want to be free. I said, honey, you've been trying to be free for 3 years, and you've been locked up. And so he said, I'll tell you what, Charlotte, you just go do what you think you need to do, and you call us collect every week to let us know you're okay. And because if you don't, the courts will find out you're not staying at home. So she goes off to Las Vegas and stayed about, almost a year. And finally she called us and said, Mom, I think I'm ready to come home. So Charlie sent her money to fly home, and she started to work, and she got her GED. Today, there's just no way I could praise her enough to see what she was and what she is. The other kids all turned out all right. I always said I taught by bad example. They're wonderful mothers. I never hear them yell at the children. They don't live close enough for me to be around them all the time either, though. But they're all busy. They have their own religions. One married a Catholic, and the other one's in another her religion. And then Charlotte lives there by us, and she's the only one that stayed by us. I said, Charlotte, you're the only one that did everything backwards. You're supposed to leave home after you graduate from school. But you left home before, and then you come back home. All the other kids all left home and went away. One lives on the other side of Springfield, and one in Colorado, and the son lives in Houston. And so here's Charlotte staying here, and like I said, she married and had this beautiful granddaughter that's 13 now. And so she's getting her chance to see what she's going to do. She doesn't drink anymore. She doesn't do any of those weird things. In fact, I'll go over and clean her house. Now, I get bored, so I go over to her house and clean so she could, I could see if there's anything around, or else she would have a good hide. I don't go over there to do it for that reason, but anyway, I can't believe how they've turned out all right in spite of me. Because God just, took care of things that I couldn't. Today, Charlie and I'll sit there in our home, and it's just unbelievable, the marriage that we have. I said, I always wanted to be in, and I love to be in love. I know there's a difference in love and being in love. Al-Anon taught me that. In love, that's when you're supposed to be passionate. You've got to love them like God loves them. So I had to learn how to love them like God loved them. And then my passion and the other came back. And today we can say, of course, when they're the ages that we are, you can be in love and pat on them, they don't bother you. So it's kind of fun. But I said, Charlie, did you ever think when people got this old, here I'm 69, he's 74, I said, did you think when people got this old, they'd feel like this about each other and look across at each other? We just love to pat and touch each other. And even though we have everything, the opposites. I can't believe how two people are so opposite. In fact, we don't even use the same kind of toothpicks. He likes the flat ones, I like the round ones. I have my checking account, he has his, so we never argue about money. And so everything is his and hers. Phone bill comes in, I pay for my phone calls, so he can never argue about the phone calls. But it's just unbelievable how those things. In fact, the other day he was buttoning up his shirt, and I've never noticed it before. He buttons his shirt from the bottom up. Can you believe it? You always go to the bottom, top down. I said, Charlie, that's another thing that we don't have in common. Of course, we both start laughing. But it is so wonderful. I remember after he'd been sober about 10 or 12 years, I thought, I'm going to tell him what kind of a person he really is, Because I said, did you know that, I figured surely he won't get drunk over this. I said, you're the most arrogant, dominating, egotistical SOB I know. And he was kind of quiet for a minute, and he looked at me and said, Barbara, if I'm that bad, why are you living with me? And I thought about it for a minute, and I thought, that's just the kind I want. I've got to have somebody that I'm not going to push around. I mean, he is the boss. I mean, you do as he says. So, if he gives me a check every week, and I do what he says. If he doesn't, I don't get my allowance. if I don't do what he says, he said, Barb, if you don't start cooking me or something a little better, I'm going to cut you back on your grocery now. Oh, okay, what do you want for supper tonight, honey? Hey, you pay, I play. Just like my bosses. Only I didn't play with my bosses. I get to sleep with this boss. But my bosses, I always got that check every week. But I did exactly what they told me to do. I always wanted to be the best employee that they had. And so I'm going to be the best wife Charlie had. But I just, it's unbelievable that things could be this wonderful. And I tell you what, when you work these steps and your life gets better, you don't have as much stress. It's wonderful not to have all this stress. Today I'm free to be me and be the kind of person that God wants me to be. They told me to do the opposite. I'm a talker. I never shut up. I talk fast when I talk. And so my sponsor, she's very methodical about things and very careful. And so I thought, I want to be like her. And she doesn't talk all the time. I'll quit talking so much. And so I started trying not to talk so much. Every time something, better not say. And I was holding it in. I was getting worse and worse and worse. It's like constipation, I guess. It's pain. Finally, I said, Wanda, I just can't not talk. It's making me so angry. And she says, Barbara, I'm a hyper person. I've always been hyper. I've tried to slow down and not do so many things. Sit still. Be content right where you are. You don't have to be doing something. And she said, Barbara, I read somewhere you can't make a racehorse out of a plow horse out of a racehorse. And so Wanda's the plow horse, I'm the racehorse. And she said, if you can't quit talking, then you always got to say something nice. So every morning on my way to work, I would always say, please God, let me reflect you on what I do and say today. And I remember this one lady where I was working, she said, Barbara, you're the only person I know that could put somebody, I was a manager or some salespeople, that could really put them in their place but call them honey. So today, because of what we have and what people like our servants in our area, and each one of you are going to have your turn, just showing up for the meeting. We have a responsibility to be there at that meeting too, and that's something else I wanted to be sure and touch that. So many times people come to 2 or 3 meetings and they don't come back. When I started going, I found something there. I owe it to you. There's times I don't want to go, but I thought, I've got to go. The guilt if I don't go, because they were there for me. And who's going to be there for our children and grandchildren? We're seeing 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation. What's Al-Anon going to be like if we don't keep saying the same old thing over and over and over again? Thank goodness that we've got some people that in our area, which all we knew were steps and traditions, and we stick to that. And I'm just so grateful for the meetings that we've had here this weekend. And I've had such a good time. The little baskets and everything were wonderful. Thank you.